Welcome everybody. We at r3.0, we are very pleased to devote an open dialogue series to bioregioning in the context of the open dialogues that we at r3.0 already started in 2024. This is in expression of a repositioning of r3.0's work program towards coherence creation in the context of collapse of our current economic system design and predominant colonialist cultures. At r3.0, we will focus on convenings, two-eyed bioregional knowledge commons design, and self-governance in ways that bridge with Indigenous governance systems. This series of Bioregioning Open Dialogues is also designed to lead into r3.0's International Conference on September 9 to 11, a co-created event with a virtual global conference connected to many bioregional conferences in the world. Today is the first edition of this series of open dialogues titled Histories of Bioregioning. My colleague Bill Bowie will now take over and present today's topic in more depth, as well as welcoming our three amazing speakers to learn from and dialogue with. Over to you, Bill.
Thanks so much, Ralph, and thanks to our speakers, and in particular, thanks to all of you for joining. We're, as Ralph said, really excited about kicking off this year, this season. We sort of started this open dialogue process just organically. Somebody proposed it in a LinkedIn post at the very beginning of last year, and it sort of has struck a chord. And so we are committing this year's series of monthly open dialogues to bioregioning. And so we're very excited to be starting here with the histories, and the plural is purposeful there, histories of bioregioning. And we have three great speakers, as Ralph mentioned. Ralph did the welcome. I'm just doing a very little bit of context setting, but we're really, excited to hear from Lyla June Johnston, Brandon Letsinger, and Karie Crisp. The one thing I'll say before handing it over to Lyla June to kick us off is that it would be great if folks could put your questions into the sidebar, into the chat as we go. And Ralph and I will be monitoring those, and we will facilitate the discussion when we open up to that. Some of that will be us, reading from the questions that are coming out. In some instances, we might ask you to go off mute and voice them, but we might do some sort of synthesis and such. So this tends to work pretty well. Finally, standard Zoom protocol of folks could stay on mute if you're not speaking. That would be great. So I think that gives enough background context. The last thing I'll say is just that, we're starting this series with sort of looking back historically to really try to create a body of information in these dialogues that helps to ground a common understanding of the bioregioning movement. So it was, certainly purposeful that we're starting by looking back and honoring the work that has gone on literally for millennia in the bioregioning project, if you will. So with that, no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Lyla June Johnston, who spoke at our conference a few years ago and will be speaking at our conference in September. And we're really, really excited to hear from you, Lyla June. Over to you.
Thank you. So happy to be here. Greetings, my relatives and my people. I'm from the Nanisht Ejitrachitni clan of the Dene Nation. We are also incorrectly known as Navajo. My other three clans are Ashihe, Tsetestis, and Bilagana. We get our clans from our first clans we honor all of our four grandparents, but our first clan comes from our mother, which came from her mother, and so on. So I like to honor my grandmothers by stating my clan, Nanisht Ejutachitni. So, right, bioregioning. So happy to talk a little bit about this from, I suppose, as they call it, Native American perspective, but we prefer generally these days Indigenous peoples, not Native American, because America is named after Amerigo Vespucci, who was documented to have been commissioned to look for people to enslave and gold to extract. So we don't really like being named after that guy. God bless him, bless his soul, wherever it is. But we also don't call this place America. We call it Turtle Island, which comes from a Haudenosaunee creation story in which Sky Woman fell from the sky onto a turtle's back and sort of magically collaborated with a lot of different species to create this landmass we know as North America. And although that is sort of a legend, it is imbued with a lot of really profound values that are more than just cute stories. They are the very core that drives the sustainability of our societies. Some of those values are the fact that we collaborate with nature. The other is that we are honor the root of things as feminine. Most Native nations in this continent are generally matrilineal and matrifocal. I won't say matriarchal because we're not really like power over anything, but just very much centering women, and thereby centering life as they are the life givers. Okay, so although I'm going first and talking a lot about deep history, I just want to make it clear that Indigenous peoples are right now, and we are the future as well. But I also appreciate folks, taking the time to honor the longstanding history. I think the oldest case study I'm about to show you is about 6,000 years old. So I think bioregionalism is really this notion that instead of defining ourselves by which random state we live in, the United States is particularly arbitrarily drawn, just random lines everywhere, honoring our allegiance to places based on watersheds, based on, I'm just going to turn my sound off. I keep hearing all the sounds for some reason. I need to fix that. So if you need to get a hold of me, chat me, because I can't hear anyone because I'm hearing a lot of dings as a co-host. Okay, so bioregionalism is this notion that we can take care of bioregions, meaning, for example, where a watershed is, where a certain type of ecosystem exists, and defining ourselves and our purview as people, and our task and our mission of what we are meant to take care of based on those ecosystemic boundaries, rather than boundaries drawn by random people, usually trying to own land and and control land, and instead letting the land control us. And you'll notice that there are certain areas that are named after humans, like Georgia, Washington State. And then there's, instead of people who name the land after themselves, there are people who name themselves after the land, such as the Middle River people, which is a nation in Northern California, also known as the Winnemem-Wintu, or people of the Flint, which is the true name of the Mohawk Nation. They name themselves after the land. And so I think that's a very key difference, a key paradigmatic and cultural difference, is human beings that want to name the land after themselves and stick a flag in the ground versus human beings that want to be named after the land. And it kind of harkens back to that old famous quote of the earth does not belong to us, but rather we belong to the land. And so I think it's quite wonderful when human beings have the humility to be in alignment with what's around them, and to see the earth as our elder. A lot of creation stories around the world, not just Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, but around the world, are actually folks who, sorry, that ding's still happening. Just give me one moment. I think I can fix it real quick. That's my bad. I've got a new computer. I haven't fixed all the settings. Does anyone know how to turn off all the sounds? Let's see.
You can under audio settings, if you click the little microphone in the lower left under audio
I got
settings.
it. Yep, I'm there.
Oh. And you can go to the top and just put output volume all the way down.
Oh.
And then when it comes into the dialogue, obviously put it back up. And apologies, this is a good prompt for us to maybe think about setting it differently so that your sharing rights don't also coincide with the dings. So sorry about that, Lyla June.
And if
Thank you.
and you
Thank you
turn
so
on Do
much.
Not Disturb, it should turn on anything that happened and turn off everything that happens outside of Zoom if you turn on your Do Not Disturb on a Mac.
Okay, no, it's Zoom stuff that's making the sound. Yeah. Thank you. I'm usually the one giving tech advice, so it's kind of cool to get tech advice. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into a few case studies just because we don't have a lot of time. And yeah, I would love to just give you a few examples of research that I've done, really just combing through what's already been done. It's kind of incredible the amount of research that has occurred showing the longstanding relationship of Indigenous peoples with their homelands. And I want to say before I start that the notion of terra nullius in Turtle Island or North America, and Aviala, which is our word for South America, is just not true. There was never any virgin land here. There was never any pristine wilderness. There was never any untouched nature prior to European arrival. We know that human beings have been in North and South America for at least 25,000 years. We know personally, we know much longer, but we've only been able to prove without any debate 25,000 years. We've been here a long, long time. We've had a long time to shape it, to prune it, to clip it, to burn it, to select it, to take care of certain, certain parts of the land that really created a human influence landscape. Of course, one of our greatest tools was fire, and really using fire to shape the land, to augment pasturage for herbivores, and really shaping the land to meet our needs while also understanding we had a responsibility to take care of all life. So let me get into a couple of those examples. One of the things I love to talk about is the chestnut groves of the Shawnee ancestors. So if you go to the eastern woodlands, you won't see very many chestnuts anymore, but there used to be chestnuts that grew from Maine down to Georgia. And we used to think that this was natural, that these were just naturally occurring chestnuts. But we now understand that these chestnuts would not have existed in the scale and abundance that they did without the active human management of Indigenous peoples. So this is a picture of the chestnuts from a long time ago. Unfortunately, the Americans didn't know how to take care of them and grew them too close together, created a blight. And the American chestnut is almost completely extinct right now. And we have a picture of a native family here with one of their huge chestnut trees. These used to be old growth groves. On the right-hand side, a tree that wasn't, an artist's rendition of a tree that wasn't spaced too closely. And is allowed to billow out and be a tree. So the way that these were managed, and I'm going to show you a graph in a moment, is by burning the forest floor in between the widely spaced chestnuts routinely. This did several things. It eliminated competing vegetation. It kept new saplings from growing because you wanted fewer trees per acre. And that would actually help the trees be healthier because they weren't competing for limited sunlight, nutrients, and water. And there are other benefits of burning the forest floor routinely, including creating pasturage for herbivores, opening up the area for travel, cycling the nutrients so that that nutrient-dense ash creates living soil systems. Fire has many, preventing catastrophic fire. If you burn routinely every 2 to 3 years, you're going to have a reduced fuel load and a reduced fire hazard. So here is a graph of chestnut pollen. And this pollen shows that Indigenous peoples garden this area for 3,000 years. So on the left hand is time. This is a 9,500-year-old soil core. And each of these columns is the presence or absence of certain types of pollen. You can see 3,000 years ago, chestnut pollen comes out of nowhere. This is how we know this was an anthropogenic ecosystem, is that it comes out of nowhere. We then see hickory pollen coming in pretty strong. And about 2,000 years ago, we see black walnut pollen coming out of nowhere. And we also see on the right-hand side fossilized charcoal, indicating that this biodiverse food forest was planted by human beings and managed by routine burning of the forest floor. So I love this graph because it shows that not only did human beings create a biodiverse food forest, they actually managed to sustain it for 3,000 years up until the blight comes. You can see it drop off there. The next one I want to show is the Kwakwal clam gardens. So these are also a form of bioregionalism because they augment clam habitat in certain areas. This obviously wouldn't work in Kentucky, which is where this graph, where this last slide was shown. This was soil core from Kentucky. This wouldn't work there, right? But this will work in a place where the tide rises and falls, and they would create these intertidal rock walls here. And they still do, they're revitalizing them right now. And so this intertidal rock wall, as the tide rises and recedes, it is fortified by sediment, and it creates these warmer, calmer pools on the shoreline side, which is perfect for clam habitat and clam proliferation. And so it's really quite cool how human beings augmented clam habitat on large scales. And the oldest rock wall we find here is 3,500 years old. So again, these are long-standing systems of bioregional care. All of these red lines here on the right-hand side are where we find anthropogenic clam gardens. And we know that 35% of the coastline was augmented with clam gardens, whereas before humans started this, there was 35% less clam habitat. And this is important that it's not only to feed humans, it's also to feed minks, raccoons, water birds, otters. This system is designed to be kin-centric in the sense that it's not about anthropocentrism where we're only supporting human beings. We're also supporting all the kin that we are related to, all the life forms that we are related to. So it's a non-human centric food system. But having said that, the humans do benefit greatly from the system, and it does feed the people. But it's just not that we see ourselves as the only thing worth feeding. The next quick thing I want to go over is American grasslands pyromanagement. So this is a quote from a little scientific article. The Illinois Confederacy shaped and altered much of this region as an anthropogenic creation. Like many other indigenous groups in North America, their most important tool was fire. Burning the prairies, they made the grasses hospitable for grazers and managed prairie as a game reserve to maximize productivity. In other words, by burning the land, you are actually creating grasslands, ironically, because as you burn, you are recharging that soil full of nutrients. And my brother did an experiment where he burned half his field and he didn't burn the other. And the next month, the part that had been burned was thriving the growth was not only much bigger, but much more nutrient dense. So you can attract game animals by burning the land and creating these really robust grasslands. And you also maintain the grassland because every time you burn, you're keeping the shrubs and the saplings and the trees from moving in, and you're maintaining it in this arrested succession, they call it. You're arresting it in the grassland state. So we augmented bison habitat, and actually I'll get into that in a second. The Miamia lunar calendar, which is a tribe in a native nation in the Ohio River Valley, has a lunar calendar, and the September moon is called the grass burning moon. So this is just me proving to you, I'm not making this up. Burning was so important that we institutionalized it within our calendrical systems. So every September, the full moon comes, it's time to burn. Any worries about the greenhouse gases? There's actually a net carbon sink, because by creating healthy soils and injecting that ash in there, the soil become living soils. And so they're going to store a lot more carbon than they release. Great question. There's been some interesting studies on that. But the ash really, really supports the soil, and it stimulates microbial activity, and they can create 4 foot, 5 foot deep topsoils. So in the Miamia, what they say, in Saskatchewan Kilswab, we see fire as something that restores and gives new life to the prairie. Fire helps clear the land of old grass and brush and open seed pods that have fallen to the ground. Because of fire, new flowers and plants emerge in the spring. So it's quite cool how, this is a very ancient practice. And this book on the left is quite cool. It's called Forgotten Fires. And it goes state by state, showing how Indigenous people shaped this whole continent with fire. And when they came in, to plant, wheat and barley in Nebraska and all these places, they're like, oh, the soil is so nice. I wonder how it got so nice. It must just be nature. Not realizing this soil was containing and sequestering so much carbon over time, because they had routinely burned the land every few years for thousands of years. We saw that graph, right, of the Shawnee burning the chestnut area for thousands of years, that it actually stored so much carbon, and it actually created this living topsoils. If you look at the old diaries in this book, they show people marveling at the 4 foot deep black loamy soils. And then of course they destroyed that whole topsoil and created the Dust Bowl by planting tons and tons of wheat and essentially erasing thousands of years worth of soil management and grasslands management. It's a thing, but we can rebuild it. And so lastly, I'll just show this picture of the bison. A lot of times we imagine human beings, native peoples, chasing the bison, hunting the bison. But we're really trying to reframe it and remind people that the bison also chased us. They chased our fire, which we know opened up bison habitat as far east as Pennsylvania and as far south as Alabama. There was bison thriving all around this continent, and it would not have been possible without the active human management of grasslands and soil systems. And so it was quite a symbiotic system where the human beings fed the bison nearly as much as the bison fed them. So I'm going to stop sharing. As you can see, I have a lot more really cool examples of bioregional management. But we don't have time. But I'll just say it's holistic, landscape scale, ecosystemic, millennial scale, meaning every system I've shown you is thousands of years old. Focuses on habitat expansion. We don't fence or cage any of our food, and it's a stewardship mentality. And so, yeah, I think I like to show how they did this in Norway too. We see the exact same fire pattern in Norway in the Mesolithic era. So this is not just a native thing. This is a human thing. This happened all around the world. Human beings as a gift and human beings being a keystone species within their specific bioregion. And Australia, yes, my advisors at Stanford University worked with the Mardu of Australia. So I think I'm out of time. Is that right, Bill?
It is,
yeah,
unfortunately.
Okay, so just so grateful. What I mean by the bison chased us is they chased our fire. As we burned parts, we opened up grassland, so they were following that. It's sort of more of a metaphor than an actual chasing. So I'm just so grateful. I think I'll just end with one final word that bioregionalism isn't just about drawing a line around an area and never touching a blade of grass. If there's anything Indigenous regenerative management has taught me, it's that we belong on the land, and that Mother Earth requires our active participation in clipping, pruning, manicuring, managing, for lack of a better word, stewarding the land, and that human beings have an ecological role in the bioregion. We're not separate from nature. We are part and parcel of the system, and we can contribute things to ecosystems that only human beings can contribute. So I will end there, and thank you so much for that little bit.
Thank you so much, Lyla June, and thank you. I appreciate actually how you had to go through some of your other examples to get to a later slide, which shows at least very quickly, provisionally, how many other sort of case examples you have from your research that demonstrate, in particular, this key relationship between human beings and the earth and other species that we are relatives with, the sort of symbiotic relationship that bioregioning as a movement is really seeking to tap into and continue that process. So thank you, and we look forward to, there's a few good questions coming in for the Q&A session already, but we're gonna move on over to Brandon Letsinger from the Cascadia bioregion to move into some history that really sort of starts from the 1970s when the bioregioning movement sort of reignited, I guess you might say, and put that kind of nomenclature onto the project. So Brandon, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And it's wonderful to see everybody here this morning. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And thank you, Lyla, for that really wonderful first session. I think just to continue on everything that Lyla was saying, bioregionalism is, obviously the history goes back for the majority of human existence. And so and it started to kind of, I think, get picked up on in Western tradition and science around the 1970s. And so I'll maybe just kind of start with that element. I'm going to start by just weaving together a few different threads that I think were really seminal in the early bioregional movement. The first being the work of Donella Meadows, who in 1972 wrote a book called Limits to Growth. And this was the first time that people started to really look at and examine the human impact and actually look at the whole planet and realize that actually there might be a limit to, to how we're developing our society and our different agricultural practices and pollution, and actually start to look at that systemic level. In 1982, she founded a really important kind of network of networks of academic and science relationships to look at this, called the Belaton Group. And one of the large impacts that she really created was also kind of helping envision this idea of a bioregional learning center. You'll see this quote pulled and used still today, because it's just as relevant, of this idea of citizen scientists really stepping forward and building knowledge systems that can really go between the halls of power out to people who are doing work in the landscape, that are doing regenerative food, and that can connect between all of them. And so I think her work was very important, and so I just kind of want to name that. The next person who I want to kind of name is a conservation and ecologist named Raymond Dossmann. He studied under a really important ecologist named Aldo Leopold, and he was really influential in helping bring a lot of these ideas to a broader, more mainstream, knowledge base, really first, in California, and then at the United Nations. And so he helped start a program called Man in the Biosphere program. He worked with the IUCN, which is the World Conservation Union, And then he worked with a UBC professor, Michaelos Uvardi, in 1973 and 1975 to grow some of the first biogeographic maps of realms and provinces, really looking at the whole world of these like climatic zones. And yet, despite all of this, he realized that something was missing, because again, these early kind of ways of looking at it were still excluding humans and kind of the physical realities of the place. And then the other big thing that he did was to help organize the first UN conference on the human environment, which would be very influential for helping grow the bioregional movement, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then the last thread that I think is really important just to be aware of is Peter Berg and Judy Goldhaft, who helped start an organization called Planet Drum in 1973, really emerging out of the counterculture, the Diggers in San Francisco, which was a very urban group, and then very enmeshed and involved with a lot of the back to the land and rural movement and reclamation movements in the 1970s. A lot of this would kind of form the early threads for what bioregionalism would become. So where did the idea of bioregionalism actually kind of emerge from? And it emerged from a story of many voices happening all across the continent, and then kind of being woven together in this kind of new bioregional identity. In 1970, there was a person very inspired by Raymond Dossmann and who followed his work very closely, named Alan van Nieuwkerk, who lived in Nova Scotia. And he began to publish these broadsides and pamphlets under the name of Root, Branch, and Mammal that started to kind of explore this idea of bioregions. And then he would actually kind of publish the first writings on what a bioregion might be. And it would be from him when Peter Berg and Judy Goldhaft were traveling across. They set off in 1971 as part of a back to the land caravan that visited different intentional communities, staying with people like Gary Snyder and other people. And they ended in Nova Scotia, where Peter Berg stayed with him, kind of got familiar with the concept of bioregions, and then was, Newkirk kind of was like, hey, and there's a conference happening in 1972, and a guy named Raymond Dossmann that you should really connect with. And because of that, Peter Berg actually went out to the first United Nations Convention on the Human Climate that was organized by Raymond Dossmann, and was very blown away by what he saw, because it was this first dichotomy that I think actually established a pattern for the rest of these kind of international conferences, which was you had a gathering of all the different countries and delegates and representatives inside these walled off offices. And then you had 10,000 people in the streets of what he would call the planetariat, which is an emerging class of people that was not represented by the United Nations, and it was not being represented by the people in those rooms. And so he was a videographer, and so he documented these films, and then he would actually do interviews from the street and document what was happening and broadcast them inside the conference. And this gathered Indigenous people from around the world. It was the time of the Vietnam War, so effects of Agent Orange, and then also pesticides and other types of deforestation and really nasty chemical things that none of which was being talked about in that room. And so this was a very impactful event for him. And it was when him and Judy returned to San Francisco in 1973 that they would launch the Planet Drum Foundation. This is the article that was published by Alan van Nieuwkerk, Bioregions Towards a Bioregional Strategy for Human Cultures, in 1975. And the big shift that you'll see is that they realized from this early work that the thing that was being left out was a thing that Lyla just talked about. Humans are a part of our environment. We are not separate from them. And actually, if we look at some of the biggest harm and healing that we need to do, it's this idea that humans are somehow separate from our environment. We're separate from all of the things and the impacts of how we grow food and how we live our lives. So bioregionalism then was being envisioned by this group of people who really then actually come together to re-envision what living in place can look like, and really looking at the cultures that grew from place and that have evolved to live in this and celebrate the context of place for hundreds of years. In 1977, Peter Berg actually came together with Raymond Dossmann, and they co-published an article, a book called Re-inhabiting a Separate Country, and really started to talk about this idea of bioregional cultural awareness, and how this idea of bioregion is different than the strictly natural science where that is still removing humans from that idea. So the whole idea was that they wanted to start to put humans back into the places that we lived. In San Francisco, one of the biggest groups to push this forward was the Frisco Bay Mussel Group from 1975 to 1979. They published a really cool watershed guide for knowing place. They started to look at the indigenous ways of living, and was one of the first kind of really like bioregional examinations of how to live in place that would also guide and inform Planet Drum for what they were doing in the next decades to come. One of the big things that they did was they started launching bioregional bundles. And this was such a fun way that the idea was, at first it was just about bioregionalism, and then they started to partner with different organizers in each different bioregion and watershed to create these different place-specific things. And they had poetry and maps and seasonal wheels, and writing about different bioregional technologies or ways to grow or build in place. And they intentionally did these in a way that was kind of a random assortment of stuff that would be put into them, so that they were meant to be dumped out on a table. And so every time people would be having to actually like interact with physical objects in a different way, and read poetry and be inspired, so that everybody had a different experience with interacting with it. And they were meant to be dumped out and really create these conversations that would help inspire people to get to know their place better. This all culminated in 1979, and with a much broader, counterculture, bioregional culture that was building, that was really weaving together anti-nuclear, environmental, civil rights, all of these different threads together. And they hosted a conference, Listening to the Earth, that gathered a lot of these voices. So you'll see people like Gary Snyder, Ernest Kallenbach, but also, also thinkers like Murray Bookchin and other things like that were all involved in these early things. The next thing that they did is, starting in 1979, they started publishing just a magazine called Raising the Stakes. And this became a bioregional directory that could go out to all the different organizers, and it helped synthesize and compile the stories and voices and updates. So all of the events that we'll talk about were also being documented in these beautiful reviews, where you can actually go back and read the decades of conversations and writings and work of these different people. And the last person I might want to name is actually on this call today, which is David Hankey, who started with the in the Ozarks, and then is responsible for helping kind of think up and plan and start to organize the first North American bioregional congresses, the NABCs. And these would be held around the continent every 2 years, as also different regional bioregional congresses were starting up. And I think he would go and help and weave a lot of these different threads together to start these conversations that involved hundreds and then thousands of different people. Just to provide a very brief lens, because just on my own bioregion and home, this was very impactful and really influenced and grew a Cascadian bioregional movement, which grew up into this place in the 1980s. Starting in 1981 with this idea of Cascadia as a bioregion kind of starting to emerge, to different student groups starting to really adopt the idea and then actually hosting the first Cascadia Bioregional Congress in 1986, hosted by students. And so you start to see these gatherings like David Hankey and David McCloskey and all of these other people. And the other really important thing that they started to do was really explore this idea of bioregionalism as a two-eyed way of seeing. And so one of the first things that Congress organizers did was also work and develop this with the Coast Salish people. And so working with the Southern Lushootseed people, they worked with a knowledge holder and elder, Vi Hilberts, to really actually help bring in and host Ish River gatherings. And then also in the Northern Lushootseed part, working with Lee and Ayanna Miracle, around really like kind of more of the Mish side and gatherings. And this actually culminated in the NABC3, which was the third North American Bioregional Congress, which was actually held at Squamish, and included, was held at the Longhouses there, and included people all the way from Haida Gwaii and elders. And so you're starting to see this weaving of conversations happening in how do we actually re-inhabit our place? How do we rethink and redefine what this all looks like? This also played a really important part in how bioregional mapping emerged in this place. And that was actually led by different First Nations in British Columbia, creating bioregional atlases, going and doing interviews with elders, looking at migratory patterns, and then using these in court cases to assert sovereignty against Canada, first at the provincial level and then to the federal Supreme Court, to actually assert and defend their territory, which had never been ceded or given away or written away. And they were successful in helping define these different areas. This bioregional mapping tradition, Doug Aberley worked with the Tsleil-Waututh people to help them do a bioregional atlas in 1985. And then he was able to kind of help, he became a UBC SCART professor, and he worked with a group in the Gulf Islands then to create this bioregional mapping handbook, giving the land a voice, which led to one of the coolest community art projects. We like to share it a lot, called Islands in the Salish Sea, a community atlas. This was also a large impact that grew out of these early meetings in the 80s, was a reframing that we don't live in the Puget Sound in the United States and the Prince George, the Strait of Georgia in Canada. Actually, we live in the Salish Sea. And so these early mapping projects helped define a lot of that and really helped kind of build this tradition of barefoot mapping, where we got to create our own maps as defined by our communities living here. And just lastly, I'll say that these people are still here, and the impact of this isn't a disconnected history that just is 40 years ago and then it stops. These people are still here living in every different watershed, still making an impact today. And just to name that, in 2015, David McCloskey released this beautiful map of Cascadia that he had been working on for more than 40 years, and it includes 70 different layers. It is an atlas into itself of different ways of looking and examining this place. But also, like the Wet'suwet'en, having fought and defined for their sovereignty, is now the frontline community that is facing that's trying to block oil and gas pipelines being put across their land, trying to connect resource extraction to these Asian markets. 1988, Bert Weber really started to explore this idea of the Salish Sea, which was recognized in 2010, 2011. And these people are still really just doing that all today. So with that, I'm going to stop and just say thank you.
Well, thank you, Brandon. That was a really, really super fascinating, quick walk through quite a bit of history. Thank you for condensing it in such a way that we could really take it in. And I can already imagine people will be looking at those slides and also recognizing the artistry in the mapping. Somebody mentioned that in the sidebar. So thank you for being the archivist and historian that you are, building on the archiving and historical work of others. So that brings us to our last presenter here, Karie Crisp, who is currently pursuing her PhD on bioregioning, and particular, I believe it's the political ecology of the bioregional movement. But if I'm speaking wrong there, Karie, over to you to correct me and to continue our walk through the history and helping us to understand the relevance for present practice and moving into the future. So over to you, Karie.
Okay, great. Let me just share my slides here. Oh, I need a sharing capability.
There we go. Sorry about that. We tried to cut down on the beeping in the background.
No problem. So thank you so much to Lyla June and Brandon for those enlivening presentations. Somebody was saying in the sidebar, it's very refreshing after this week. And so thank you also to Bill and r3.0 for this opportunity to share about the history of the bioregional movement. In the last couple of years, interest in bioregions has really exploded. And I would say that we are now fully in the second wave of the movement, at least as conceived from a Western point of view. So I've noticed that many of the newcomers, however, to this movement are very unaware of the movement's long history. And many in the first wave are also unaware of how the movement is moving on in different ways. So I hope this presentation provides some helpful context and some lessons learned as we move forward on our journeys to move into this mutual beneficial relationship with the Earth community. So for over 50 years, the small but mighty nonprofit Planet Drum has taken a grassroots approach to ecology that emphasizes sustainability, community, self-determination, and regional self-reliance. The organization has largely been run by the two people you see on the screen here, Peter Berg and Judy Goldhalf, plus many, many volunteers. And as Brandon mentioned, the organization got its start after Peter came back from the UN Conference on the Environment, where he was seeing all those people in the streets who were totally outraged by the environmental devastation that was happening in their places. And after returning to the US and traveling to all those back to the land communities, Planet Drum has really started to keep those communities in contact with each other, but also to learn from each other's efforts. Bioregional thinking, as Lyla June has covered, is not a new idea at all. It's in the sense that humans have lived closer to the land prior to the rampant colonization that we've seen in the last 500 years or so. And Indigenous cultures have long established biocultural identities. This is still my favorite definition of a bioregion, so people use this in a lot of different ways today. I see people using it not in the way that Peter Berg and Raymond Dasman did in terms of adding the human cultural component. So that's really the unique offering here, is that this idea started to gain traction when they teamed up, and Raymond, as Brandon mentioned, was already working with this idea of the biotic provinces, but Peter's unique contribution was really pushing that beyond it to say it's more than just an ecological concept, it's a cultural one as well. One of the key successes of Planet Drum was spreading the idea of bioregions to a wider audience with many of the publications, some of which Brandon already mentioned. They also did a lot of educational workshops, bioregional mapping sessions, and also artistic performances. And the Pulse and the Raise the Stakes that you see here were biannual publications that covered a huge range of topics, from agriculture to spirituality, restoration culture, eco-governance, and so on. And I really encourage you all to take a look at this if you're interested. I think they're a treasure trove of information, and much of this information is still very relevant today. As Brandon mentioned, Planet Drum produced bundles that included many beautiful maps and poetry. I think what Planet Drum was especially good at was incorporating the arts into this, that really kind of pulls at the heartstrings as well as the head. And so the picture in the middle here is the book that Brandon already spoke about, Re-inhabiting a Separate Country. And I think this is really a foundational text. It's a bioregional anthology, and this is where Peter Berg and Raymond Dasman define a bioregion and define re-inhabitation, which was the word to use to describe the process of learning to live in a place. Another key text was Amble Toward Continent Congress, which was written by Peter Berg in 1976, and it was a manifesto to overcome what he called the politics of extinction, and to counter the fervor that was developing around the US bicentennial celebrations. So in this piece, he referred to Congress as a verb, a coming together with the continent. He writes that it's not a simple exercise. It requires an enormous amount of effort to overcome Earth colonist globalism. And this coming together with the continent is a process. It's a lifelong exploration. Brandon covered this a little bit, but I know David's on this call, so I just want to give a shout out to him. He's been a friend over the many years. And in the 70s, David was also beginning to think bioregionally, and he initiated what is now the longest running bioregional Congress, the Ozark Area Community Congress. Beginning in 1980, it will now convene this year for its 46th time. And several of us from the Bay Delta bioregion attended the last Congress in the fall in October, so we got a taste of what this was all about. There were presentations on herbalism, bioregional financing facilities, and even a discussion on potentially reviving a larger continental Congress. As far as the Congress history goes, there were 10 North American Continental Congresses over a 25-year period between 1984 and 2009. And these brought together several hundred people to work by a consensus process to create resolutions on topics such as education, green cities, energy, economics, and many more. I surveyed about 40 people who participated in these events, and some of the key learnings that surfaced was a need for more diversity, always, more people of color, more Indigenous participation, although there was that from the beginning as well, but it would be nice to have more of it in the future. Youth and all species as well. There's also a desire for more tangible skills training and more time needed for political strategy and long-term planning. There was also a need for better continuity between the Congresses, a need to explain what happened in the previous Congresses and also to publish proceedings afterwards. There were proceedings published for the first 4 Congresses. And so finally, there was a strong emphasis on this not becoming a conference. And what that means is, like, instead of showing up and having people present to you and you just listen, these Congresses were fully co-created participatory events. One of the most influential people on my thinking during my doctoral work has been the eco-theologian and cultural historian Thomas Berry, and he's shown here on the left. And he actually attended the very first North American Congress in 1984. He later wrote a book about bioregions as the context for re-inhabiting the Earth, the dream of the Earth. And he advocates in this book for humans to recognize themselves as within this interconnected web of life. A lesser known fact about Thomas is that his articulation of an Earth jurisprudence or Earth law and rights of nature cases are really gaining traction worldwide right now. And I see this as one way to potentially strengthen the bioregional movement. Bioregional philosophy and rights of nature challenge the dominant view as a collection of resources for human use and exploitation. Berry's most famous quote is, "The universe is a communion of subjects and not a collection of objects." And rights of nature expands this idea into a legal framework that recognizes the intrinsic rights of nature to exist and flourish. The groundwork for this was really laid over many, many years. Berry was influenced by many sources, including he was also a scholar of world religions and was very influenced by Indigenous cultures, but also Christopher Stone's 1972 book, called "Should Trees Have Standing?" And also by the 1982 World Charter for Nature, which the United States was the only country not to ratify. In 2001, he met with a group organized by the Gaia Foundation, and that really catalyzed his principles of Earth jurisprudence, which he finally wrote down at 87 years old. So it seemed unlikely that he would realize any of the fruits of this effort, but that didn't turn out to be the case. In 2008, Ecuador was the first country to put rights of nature into their constitution. And sorry, one more thing on that. let's see, but these cases also have to be enforced. And so in 2021, Ecuador's Constitutional Court ruled in favor of canceling mining permits in the Los Cedros cloud forest, and it was recognized as having legal personhood. Barry says that the central flaw in our development is our mode of consciousness that has established a radical discontinuity between the humans and other modes of being, and the bestowal of all rights on the humans. I'll just share one more quick example of rights of nature. In 2018, the White Earth Band of the Ojibwe recognized the rights of Monoman. It's a wild rice in Minnesota. This was important because tribal waters, yes, were under threat from oil pipelines. And an 1837 treaty said that the tribe had the right to gather wild rice on ceded territory. So they were able to use a rights of nature framework against Minnesota's Department of Natural Resources to oppose the pipeline. Interestingly, the Indigenous activist who worked on this was Winona LaDuke, who also attended the first North American Bioregional Congress. This was the first rights of nature case to enforce treaty guarantees. So I think the rights of nature strategy could be a way for Indigenous and allied community members to come together in novel ways to advance the shared goals within a bioregion. And if you're interested in this, there's a lot happening worldwide right now. Tons of cases giving rights to rivers. There's a website called the Eco Jurisprudence Monitor that tracks what is happening, and it's a great resource to take a look and learn more. And then I'll just close by saying a brief word about cities. The book, A Green City Program, that was written by Peter Berg and others in 1989, was based on a series of symposia that was held to cover topics such as sustainable planning, renewable energy, urban wild habitat, etc. And this led directly to the creation of the San Francisco Department of the Environment and its sustainability plan. And Planet Drum still maintains a Green City calendar of events that are happening in this area for which you can volunteer around the Bay. So all cities are in a bioregion, and urban dwelling is expected to increase. And many cities have a sustainability plan, but I'm not really aware of any that truly consider their broader impacts within a bioregion. So I encourage all of us to reach out wherever we are and learn more about what our cities are doing where we live. San Francisco, for example, is currently updating its climate action plan and is open for comments and suggestions. So with that, I'll close by just saying thank you again so much for this opportunity, and really looking forward to continued conversations with your series.
Thank you so much, Karie. Thank you for rounding out. This is an incredibly rich dialogue already, just in terms of the dialogue between these three presentations. And so now we open up to dialogue with the broader group here. I would remind folks to please put your questions into the sidebar. That certainly helps us to know who and what issues might be coming up. Until now, I've seen one question in particular come into the sidebar. It's from Bill Russell, who unfortunately had to drop. But it actually segues almost perfectly from where you left off, Karie, which he said, and this was right after Lyla June's section, great start for history learning, struggling to imagine how this can be applied for today into the future, population increase, lands already built upon, etc. I am in New Jersey, so I may be biased. So I think that that's a good starting point in the conversation. I might, Karie, since you were just presenting on that, I might open it up to you, and then Brandon and Lyla June for thoughts on that first question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the question, right? How are we going to change our lives in such a way that we can be aligned with the earth, and cities in particular are a drain usually on the bioregion. Recently, the California Donut Economic Coalition released their snapshot of California, which is not a pretty picture. It's a lot of red with signals that we're overshooting and undershooting in many ways. And that's really a counter narrative to California being the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world, right? And so, yeah, I think I wish I had a better answer for you, but I mean, San Francisco is doing a lot with composting. I think they compost like 98% of food scraps, which is amazing considering that about 40% of waste is food. They're also reducing emissions, but yeah, it's a struggle. I mean, they're also doing a lot of urban biodiversity work, and in the Presidio, they've done things like resurface streams that were previously underground and culverts. So, all of these things are what we need to be doing. And, maybe others have examples of what cities are doing that could be inspiring. But yeah, we still have a lot of work ahead of us.
Great, thanks, Karie. Brandon, do you have thoughts on that particular question?
Yeah, I might just jump in and say that I think oftentimes people think of bioregionalism as a rural idea. And actually, I think one of the biggest and most important parts of it was about putting humans back into place, and especially in cities. And so Peter Berg, actually, one of the first things that they did through Planet Drum was the Green City Project, which is still influential in San Francisco today. And I think, one of the big things that we're looking at is really that shift of helping people see in the context of a whole systems lens along a whole watershed or collections of watersheds in that series of nested scales. So with Regenerate Cascadia, one of the things that we're looking at this year is we're going to be hosting our first Cascadia Bioregional Finance Conference. And we're doing it very intentionally in the Duwamish River Valley for a whole host of different reasons. But it's the most urbanized and industrial area of, it's in South Seattle, in King County, and in Cascadia, really. It's the home of the port. It's also the home of the Duwamish people, who are still federally unrecognized, even though Seattle takes its name from their chief. It's also on the Duwamish, where it's the home of the Duwamish River that was straightened, and the wetlands filled in. And then it was the home of Boeing, and where it's become a Superfund site. It's also the home of the port. So now it's getting all of this funding, and they want to use the money to dredge the port to actually make it deeper for bigger vessels to come in. And so we're actually using this as a fishbowl to say, what does regeneration look like in an urban area? Because those are the questions that we also need to be answering. And we can't just keep humans separated, right? Bioregionalism isn't just about, kind of a utopian, regenerative agriculture vision. It's actually about how do we bring health and healing into these spaces, and how can we be working with all of the different communities to do that, and how can we take all of our knowledge with our conversations about bioregional finance, with the land regeneration, with community artists, with circular economy, and actually use this as these things as real world examples to envision a regenerative future that can actually guide our activities and landscapes. And I think the coolest thing is by doing that, it becomes deeply inspiring. And some of the most important pieces of that puzzle, I think, are actually work that you, Bill, and Ralph are working on, which is the idea of bioregional carrying capacity. It's the idea of creating our own maps, but also determining what metrics and outcomes are important for a community that's actually defined by that community, including both qualitative, the stories that are important, as well as quantitative, which is like the hard science and numbers. And so we can start to shift those conversations and then actually be very impactful with how we're partnering in terms of government, organizations, business, and community organizations.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Lyla June, over to you for thoughts on this question.
I think it's not surprising this question came up during my talk. It always comes up. Everyone's like, oh, that's so cute, Lyla, but that's not going to work for today. And I'm like, actually, we know Hawaii, for example, now imports 90% of its food as an island community. We know by looking at historical demographic evidence that there used to be more people in ancient Hawaii than there are today. More, not less, more. And 100% of their food came directly from the Ahupua'a system, which was an extraordinary form of bioregionalism in which literally each watershed became its own district. And each native Hawaiian district, this is before Columbus was ever born, right? Was in charge of taking care and bringing out the natural food-bearing capacity of the land. Extraordinary fish pond technologies, extraordinary taro patch technologies. This place was a local food system extraordinaire. It was, and they're bringing it back right now. I would definitely recommend people checking out biomimicry work by Dr. Winter, who's a Hawaiian scholar and biocultural revitalizationist of the Ahupua'a system. We know that Indigenous peoples harvested oysters out of the Chesapeake Bay for 3,500 years without fail. I don't see why this wouldn't apply to, but I think it has to do with the stereotype, right? When people imagine Native Americans, they think, oh, cool, scattered bands of nomads running around trying to build a fire. No, we were massive, densely populated eco-cities. We know through demographic evidence, demographic extrapolations, that Indigenous cultures were extremely densely populated. And my elders say, yes, we have 8 billion people, but that population problem becomes a population asset when we are actually behaving in ways that are regenerative. And people are like, oh, like, let's take, for example, the question of how are we going to do it? You know, how are we going to heal the grassland ecosystems? It's like, well, those people who ask that question are the same people who say there's too many humans. I'm like, well, get those too many humans to work, because if we have too many humans, then we have a lot of manpower, woman power, people power to create these shifts. Our issue is not a lack of options. Our issue is not a lack of manpower or woman power. Our issue is a lack of guidance and leadership and directionality. When we understand what the goal is and we organize communities towards that goal, which is what bioregionalism is doing, we have way more than enough capacity to make really profound change. So, but to boil that down to a more like, oh, actually, there's just one more study I want to mention. In the Amazon, the Mebengokre people have been doing this amazing terra preta system for eons, right? And where they are building topsoils for thousands of years through very beautiful methods of cropping, intercropping, relay cropping, of course, burning. Fire is a big part of it, bringing that ash into the soil, rotational burning. And they did a study of the Mebengokre food system. It outproduced the intensive commercial factory farm next door by 50%. Okay, so these are not inefficient systems. These are extremely, extremely efficient systems that can feed more than 8 billion people sustainably. So our issue is not how many of us there are, it's what we're doing with our lives, as we all know and as we're all learning. And that's the one beautiful thing about this time is, if we do have this extraordinary collapse that appears to be on the horizon, one of the beautiful things about collapse is you learn and you learn a lesson that is in your bones, right? Because you felt it. We've been showing people graphs of climate change for decades and no one's doing anything because they're not feeling it. But when we feel it, just like my Chacoan ancestors collapsed, just like the mound builders collapsed, just like the Mayans collapsed, that collapse was our greatest teacher. And we didn't disappear as a people, but our system disappeared. And that was a blessing. That was a good thing, because those systems, although many Indigenous peoples are very wonderful, there were instances, I would say the minority of cases, where we developed unsustainable systems. We developed caste systems, slavery even of our own people, and Creator would send us a drought. Creator would send us a flood. Creator would send us this great gift that would upend everything. And we'd have to start from scratch with all these new lessons woven into our very being. And so it's very exciting about where we're at today, because although there will be a lot of challenges, we're about to go through a very profound shift. And so I do think that this is possible. In fact, I think it's inevitable that humans will change their ways, because the definition of unsustainable behaviors is not sustainable. So it's not going to keep going this way. But I guess just to end, I want to say, yeah, this is an extraordinarily efficient way of doing things. And to boil it down to something we can all do today, I would say pilot projects. Pilot projects, pilot projects, pilot projects. Do small, successful projects. Like me, I'm always saying that Mebengokre can outproduce a factory farm by 50%. I've done that research. Now it's time for me, Lyla, to go out and show that. Show that in the Dene context, show that in the Mohawk context. So, and rebuild these systems to prove, hey, this does work, and this is how we can reinstitute them. So I think all of us can do our own pilot projects wherever we are. And I would heavily suggest focusing on food, bioregional foodscapes, bring that food out, because the food is not going to be in the grocery stores like it usually is coming up here very soon.
Thank you so much, Lyla June. And thank you in particular for honing in on the context of collapse. That question came up in the sidebar already. Kirsten Ellen Johnson noted, can you talk about bioregionalism in the context of collapse? So you started in on that. She also mentioned in reference to immediate crisis, mutual aid, and social restructuring, especially with intergovernmental dialogue with Indigenous nations. So adding a few things in. I just ask each of the three of you to keep that in mind with subsequent responses, unless you want to respond to that immediately. No. Okay, great. Oh, go ahead, Lyla June.
I'm sorry, I was responding to someone. I don't know what the question is. We can move on if you want, or if you want to restate it.
No, it was just you had already talked about the context of collapse, so I was just naming a few other elements of that. I think that another issue that's come up in the sidebar is the question of the language that the bioregional movement is using. And just to note to folks, this is a very complex process of facilitating a dialogue like this. So as I said in the sidebar, I'm going to prioritize some of the questions that came in on the sidebar first before there were folks raising hands. So I just don't want you to feel like I'm ignoring you. I'm just prioritizing what's already come in. So there was a question and a sort of a back and forth around the question of the language that's being used by the bioregional movement. And Samantha Power had, I think, a very interesting statement on that. And so, Sam, if you're able to, it'd be great if you could go off mute and just sort of voice the point that you made in the sidebar so that we can all hear that. It gets on the recording, because I think it's an important one.
Hi, Bill. Sure. Thanks for the invitation. I'm in transit today, so I won't be able to come on camera, but a question that we have been getting from, or I guess more of a response from different communities that we speak to about our work in bioregionalism, urban communities, Indigenous communities, more rural communities, and so-called red America, is that the language for them can be quite difficult. This very beautiful, poetic language of bioregionalism, which is important, right? Which is definitely interwoven with the philosophy and enables us to think in a different way. It can be hard for some people to access. And I gave the example of my parents, right? Like, despite their real interest in like wanting to understand what it is I'm up to, sometimes I tell them something in bioregional language and they're just like nodding their heads, and it's very clear that they have no idea what I'm talking about. So one of the things that my team and I at the Biofight Project have been thinking about is like really like translating this to particular communities that we want to serve, we want to work together with, into language that makes clear that they're already doing this work. They're already, you know, working as people of place, and makes it more accessible for them to connect with the bioregional movement and weave together in a way that their efforts can become greater than the sum of their parts. So we've been thinking about that particularly in an urban context, also with our Indigenous allies in Turtle Island, and also kind of in the current rural parts of America, in this like very unique political context that we're in. Like, there's a lot of potential to engage in decentralization if we use the right language and can bring those folks along. So those are some quick thoughts.
Thank you so much, Sam. And this also resonates with a comment that Donna Nelham made about speaking in terms of bioregioning as a verb, which she's seen Daniel Christian Mall, who's on the line with us today, doing. We at r3.0 have certainly embraced that approach. In part, Indy Johar from Dark Matter Labs in one of our conferences recently really pointed to the need to be doing more verbing and less nouning, so to speak. So I do think that the kind of the language that we're using here does play an important role. I'm going to just voice a couple of the questions that came in in the sidebar while we're trying to also open up to folks who've raised their hands. Benjamin Life had a question where he asked, based on this understanding of history, ancestry, and legacy, what are the lessons we can integrate from the movement's past to improve our transition strategy into a bioregional social contract? So I guess I'd open that up to Lyla June, Brandon, and Karie. I think that each of you has already started to touch on this, but I think this is a good opportunity, sort of a specific prompt for specific ways to take the past and integrate it towards the future. So Lyla June, maybe start with you if you have thoughts on that one.
Once again, I'm responding and typing. Can you please restate the question? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no worries. And I guess I will voice just to have this sort of out there for everyone. This is an instance in Zoom where we've got a rich conversation happening verbally, and then we've got this other sort of side conversation, meta conversation, if you will, happening in the sidebar. And I do want to just recognize that can be distracting for some folks. So thanks to everyone for both the rich contributions in the sidebar and a recognition that it can be distracting. So the question, Lyla June, was from Benjamin Life that was asking, based on this understanding of history, ancestry, and legacy, what are the lessons that we can integrate from the movement's past to improve our transition strategy into a bioregional social contract?
Got it. Well, I think that the time to organize is now, as we can all see. These are critical years in our little history here as Homo sapiens. We are in a time where people need hope in humanity, and we can show them that hope. When I was younger, I thought, if you don't see good news on the headlines, go out and make some. And I lived by that principle, and I was grateful that Creator allowed me to do that here and there at different times. And so we need to create the good news. We need to create the pilot projects that are successful. And we need to remember that, just like these Indigenous ancestors, they were not victims of circumstance. They were not passive hunter-gatherers. They were active in shaping their own reality. They were active in shaping a world of abundance around them. we have that same agency, each and every one of us. We have the capacity to change the world. Even just one of us does, much less all of us here together united. And so I can't understate the importance of pilot projects, because even though they might be small, they prove to the world and to ourselves that a certain strategy is successful. And so I think that even if it's a small garden in your front yard, showing people like, wow, I just produced this many tomatoes per acre, or whatever it is, it's just extraordinary. The statistics that come out of some of these regenerative farms, and the soil systems, and harnessing and tapping into the local natural forces around you, or the simple act of creating habitat for key species, that can actually have a ripple effect around you. And I think when we give ourselves permission to do something small, it gives creator a chance to do something big. Sometimes we only want to do something if it changes the world, right? We only if it saves the whole planet. Well, right now we just need to have faith that one foot in front of the other is enough. Because standing here paralyzed, I can attest that doesn't help. And I've been doing that myself. So anyways, yeah, I can pass it on. But definitely remembering our power, and remembering and giving ourselves permission to do something small, because when we take that first step, sometimes creator surprises you. All this wind comes behind you and creates much more of a windfall than you could have expected.
Thank you, Lyla June. Before seeing if Brandon and Karie have inputs on this question, I just want to note that it is 3 minutes until the formal end of this. I know that some people may need to drop off, in particular, some of our speakers may need to drop off, but we at r3.0 are able to keep the line open and keep the dialogue going. So I just wanted to let that be known. Anybody who does need to drop off, of course, we totally understand. So and then after this round, hearing from Brandon and Karie, I'll move over to folks with their hands up. Thank you for your patience on those. Brandon, do you have a response to Benjamin's question?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say, I think that we're witnessing a kind of a moment of global coherence, and that's really amazing and powerful. And I think the people who are in the Zoom room is an attestation to that, because literally everybody's incredible. I see a lot of familiar names and faces, and you are the people who are actually carrying this idea forward, and we're doing that together with a shared North Star, with shared language, with shared purpose, with shared principles, and that is powerful. And I think the thing about bioregionalism, which I love, is it is inspiring. I think so often we are disconnected, we are removed. I think nationalism and capitalism is all about disconnecting, dividing, disempowering, disenfranchising. And what bioregionalism is able to do is it takes these big, scary things like polycrisis, and it gives us a lens to break that down to a local level where we can walk out our front door and get active about the things we care about. And that is powerful. And when people start to do that, when they walk out their front door and stick their hands in dirt, when they meet other incredible people, and they start to realize, oh, right, it's actually not about the news or the political system. Like, we can actually be doing so much. And I think the other thing that I'm seeing now in this second wave of bioregionalism that is so powerful really is opening up this conversation in a whole system lens and exploring this idea of bioregionalism as a two-eyed way of seeing, that really is working to bring in the best of Indigenous knowledge and tradition that has been here since time immemorial, with the best that science has to offer, with the idea that we're a society that's very smart but not very wise. And so we need that wisdom and guidance, and with the idea that a planetary polycrisis is at a level that we have never seen before. And so we need to grow. Well, traditionally, we might have been able to live within a bioregional context of a place. We actually need to be working together. And now I think after COVID, especially, we're able to come together in these spaces in ways that we never had before. When we did our interviews with bioregional elders and traveled around over and over, it was amazing what they did in the organizing, but it was all done by mail, and they did it, and they didn't have, and it would take weeks before correspondence, and they would, and now we get to email and talk to each other directly and look at what's already becoming because of that.
Thank you, Brandon. Thoughts from you, Karie?
I think Brandon and Lyla June have covered it really well. I want to give some space to the folks who've been so patiently waiting with their hands raised, but I would just echo what's already been said, just to say, let's get better organized.
Great, thank you, Karie, and thank you for that respect to the folks who've had their hands up. And what I might do is have maybe go in pairs, so have two folks give their questions and then have sort of clustered responses. So maybe Thomas and Donna, let's hear from you first. Thomas, if you could start, and then Donna, you next, would be great. And then Ken and Lisa would be in the next tranche.
Hey, yes, hello, and thank everybody for the enlightening talks and responses. Critical timing's everything. I just wanted to share that I was in San Francisco in the 1970s and working with Peter Berg, and later up in the North San Juan community with Gary Snyder. And so I was involved in the early days of the bioregional organizations here in this country. And then I went back home, where I am now in the Southern Appalachians of North Carolina. And we created our own bioregion that we call the Katua bioregion. And we published a journal called the Katua Journal, Bioregional Journal of the Southern Appalachians, for many years. And then I began working with Thomas Berry, who is from Greensboro, but had come back from New York to home. And so Thomas and I became friends, and we're working together. And so my influence became expanded in that way. So Peter Berg, Gary Snyder, Thomas Berry, the Katua Journal, and then working with the Cherokee here locally. I live just 20 miles from the Cherokee Reservation, and so we created programs and gatherings and conferences in that kind of a unified way. So I just wanted to throw that out so that people knew about the Katua bioregion. And we have a website at Appalachian State University that contains all the old Katua journals that we did back in those days of the late 70s and 80s, that people can refer to and draw from in whatever way. So I'll put that in the chat. And I want to thank Karie too. We're communicating, and her our interaction has been very positive and helpful for me, and I'm looking forward for more of that. So thank you all very much. This is great. This is where it's happening.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And thank you for sort of adding to some of the historical documentation, if you will, that we're doing right now. One thing I'll say is I've looked at that archive, and of course, as a library archive, a lot of it is physical. And just a quick question before we go over to Donna for you, Thomas. Do you know if there are plans to digitize that? Because I know a lot of David Henke's archives are in that as well. Are there plans to digitize parts of it at least?
They're all digitized. I can.
Oh, they are.
Yeah. If you go to.
I dropped the link in the chat, Bill.
Thank you, Karie. I think I may have misread the website then in the past. Thank you for enlightening me.
Yeah, you can go to the Katua Journal at Appalachian State University archive, special collections, and all those Katua journals have been digitized.
Okay, great. Sorry, I think I was referring to some of the archives of, for example, David Henke's work. So maybe David, if you could throw into the sidebar a link to that. Donna, I know you had been next up in the queue for a question or comment.
Yeah, I'm going to make a comment here and apologize for staying off video. I'm suffering from the worst respiratory flu I've ever had, I think, in 20 years or more. But thank you so much, Bill, Lyla June, Karie, and Brandon. Very inspiring to hear everybody here. And the thing I just want to speak to is some of the bridge building that doesn't neatly fit into some of the descriptors and boxes of work that we're sometimes doing, but very important work. Like I'm participating with many people, as you know, Bill, and I'm really excited to see some of the developments in municipalities are getting underway through EE, for example. I've been working with Michael Haupt around him, his various cohorts for over 3 years. I'm really excited by the work that's underway with Earth Regeneration and Bill, Joe Brewer's work. I got into all of this through Daniel Christian Wall many years ago. So the bridge building and the right scaling, the deep learning that Lyla June spoke to, that's so important. And looking for ways that we can build more bridges and make some of this work a bit more accessible with wherever people are starting from, because it's a learning journey. And I think we're all recognizing that. So again, wonderful to hear all of the different layers that people are bringing into this. But sometimes these places are bubbles that are not feel as accessible for others that aren't here. So I'm really keen to explore ways that we can widen those pathways. And that's a lot of the work that I've been involved in doing, is looking for all the integrative ways that these things, really it's nature emerging, it's in all of us and manifesting in so many different ways with different terminology at times, but that's the life force that's coming through. So I'll stop there. Simply, it's an invitation to find ways to support what we're all doing. And thank you so much. Check.
Thanks so much, Donna. Ken and then Lisa, I see, are next up, and Alex after that. So Ken, over to you, please.
You're on mute, Ken.
I'm not hearing it. You don't appear to be on mute, but we're not hearing you.
Yeah. Oh, does that make any difference?
There we go. Thank you, Ken.
Is that working?
Yep,
okay.
Yes.
I can't hear you now, but that's okay. It's just Linux operating system compatibility, maybe. Who knows? Anyway, I am going to share 3 things real quick. Back in I was involved in the first bioregional gathering and several others as well. I live in Lawrence, Kansas, or south of Lawrence. And I just want to share a few things connecting the past with the present. One of them is a book called Truck 18, and it has your classic picture of the man in the middle of a circle. And what it does is it shows how he transitions to looking at the landscape. And it's kind of hard to know if it's showing up, but in Truck 18, starting the transition from a man in the middle to having him sitting down and looking at a landscape. This is something that was made back in 1978. It had ambled toward Congress, Continental Congress, Bioregional Congress in it. It was instrumental in me getting involved in bioregionalism. In 1985, there is something that I think that's one of the things that I think has been mentioned over and over is how to reconnect. And it's really the way I've transitioned that message is reconnecting our homes to the earth, because they're disconnected right now. And what can we do to reconnect our homes, literally our homes and our communities, to the earth? And I put together, one of the ways is through seasons. and getting to know the seasons. It's a circle. It's not a linear process. And so back in 1985, I came up with a series of charts inspired by the Congress. Yep, did I just lose it? I'm still here. Okay.
We're still with.
And I also that was 1985, so I republished it in 2007 in Wild Douglas County, which is for our local area. And the other thing that we have done, and I'll put this in the chart or in the chat, I do a weekly almanac. It's called the Kaw Valley Almanac, and it's updated weekly. And it is a way for people to connect today to the natural world. And it includes information about where we are and what is happening around us. And that doesn't matter. You can live in the city, you can live in the country, it doesn't matter. And just to really model that in your own area, to try and do something similar to that, I think is go look at that and see if it inspires you to do something. And then Kaw Council actually sprang from the forehead of David Henke's efforts back in the early 80s. And we do have a website too, kawcouncil.com, I believe. So some resources there.
And thank you so much. And if there are ways in particular to connect into the physical documents that you have in digital means, that would be great. I mean, I think that's one of the things that in some ways has been limiting a broad knowledge of the bioregioning movement, is that so much of it was in physical documentation. So that's maybe a bigger question than we can tackle right now. But thank you for sharing those resources, and just seeing them is really inspiring. We're going to go to Lisa and then Alex, and then we're really going to need to, unfortunately, I mean, this is a very rich conversation. The fact that it's going over is very encouraging, but at some point we will need to stop. So we're just going to set a boundary after hearing from Lisa and then Alex. So Lisa, over to you, please.
Hi. So I hope my remarks would be pretty brief, because I'm just starting to learn about all of this, although I have been kind of involved in related work, protection of forests, especially old growth forests. I live in a town with millions of trees and 900 people in north central Mass. I'll just say quickly that just seeing the history, the bioregional history of all of this work, it makes me think that maybe the state of our government right now is maybe a reaction to the incredible flowering that happened during this time and continued, as a way to say, oh my God, they're going to shift the paradigm. We can't let that happen. But anyways, that's, I'm an artist and a designer. I just earned my MFA in interdisciplinary fine art. I'm also on our historical commission in our town for protection of Indigenous ceremonial stone landscapes within our town. And I was fascinated by the clam garden and the rock wall, because we have a pond and there's a giant berm around the whole pond. It's made of huge boulders. There are definitely some standing stones in there, like some of the other features in our town. It's never been studied. Everybody thinks it was created by the CCC, but it's not possible. It doesn't look anything like what a settler would make. And I'm wondering if it might have a similar purpose. It's probably, people have said it's probably about 3,000 years old. And I'm curious if it might have a similar purpose to the rock wall that you showed us. And I'm wondering how I can learn more about the rock wall. And those are my questions.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You mentioned that you live in North Central Mass. What if you don't mind sharing where it is? I don't mean to get into your privacy there, but if you're comfortable saying where you live.
It's not my privacy. Cultural resources are not a public record, so that gets tricky. This is not identified as a cultural resource, but it's a potential Indigenous cultural resource.
Cool.
But I can say I live in Wendell, Massachusetts.
So just sorry, that was awkward. I didn't mean to, but just saying that because we do have quite a robust bioregional work happening locally, and you could reach out to us or if you're interested in participating in that. But I don't know if Lyla June is still on the line and had. Oh yes, there you are, Lyla June. Do you have a response to that?
I am, and I actually heard the question this time. But no, I just put in the chat a link for Lisa to follow. As for the berms in the ponds, oh yeah, I mean, all of Massachusetts was heavily sculpted. I mean, the whole continent was, but Massachusetts was a huge, densely populated area prior to Norse arrival, which actually decimated populations even before Columbus came around. But so yeah, no, there's a lot going on there, and you would probably just want to radiocarbon date the parts of the berm, and you could probably find out if it was pre-CCC or not.
Well, there's no record of the CCC building. You know, we have very clear records of what the CCC did, and there's no record of that. There's no record of construction on that. And I mean, some of the stones are like 4, 5, 6 feet long. They're mounded. They're covered with like, you know, loads and loads and loads of moss.
And that's after 500 plus years of weathering, we can still see these systems. So you can imagine in their heyday, they're probably quite extraordinary. Yeah, anyways, thank you.
Yeah, but so in handing it over to Alex, I'll just say on this issue, at a gathering that sort of resulted in the creation of the Dawnland Bioregioning Collective, Mike Thomas from the Mashantucket Pequot tribe and Jelani Fletcher from the Eastern Pequot tribe we were having lunch together. And they noted that the stone walls that one sees throughout New England, there's an assumption that that was settlers clearing the fields. And he was like, no, that was us. We did that long before settlers were here, and it was for the fire, the pyro management, I think is how you called it in your dissertation, Lyla June. So just reiterating and affirming that. Great. Alex, last question over to you, and thanks to everyone who's been able to stay on the line.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bill. It's awesome to see so many people staying even over the time. I think it's supposed to end at 9 a.m., but we're almost at 10 here. So that's, I guess, a testament to the bioregional ethos. My name is Alex Wick. I'm a master forester and the founder of a startup when we're returning trees to the moon. I posted some stuff in the chat about it, but it's, we're based on the Cascadian bioregional ethos of equity, community, and mutual aid. We're providing, essentially, it's a transnational source of pride for the new millennium. There's precedent. There's been trees on the moon before. I don't know if any of you guys remember the Apollo 11 and Apollo 14 moon landings, but there's an astronaut named Stuart Roosa, who was a U.S. Forest Service smoke jumper, and he brought up in his personal kit, he brought a whole bunch of different tree seeds. No acorns, but redwoods, sycamores, Doug fir. And so he left some on the moon, on the lunar surface, and then he also brought some back down to Earth, and it was sort of a scientific experiment. And so we're basically trying to mobilize the region's resources, the community, to return trees to the moon with the Artemis Moon Tree Project. The Artemis Project is a NASA, I guess, spearheaded return to the moon. We're trying to establish a permanent lunar base, a habitat up there. And anytime there are humans, you need plants. So, ideas we're going to be sending up Oregon State tree, Doug firs. We're starting small, which is like an algae bioreactor, and we're working on some SBIR funding. We've closed some funding from the government of Canada. So if anyone's interested in moon trees or in exobiology or any, any of this sparks your interest, please reach out to me, check it out. I think the local focus of this is great, but I think that moon trees gives us sort of a vision towards the future. So anyway, thank you guys for listening to my spiel, and
thank you, Alex. I had been conceiving of bioregionalism as an earthly terrestrial. So this is you're expanding our scope of consideration. And thank you for all of those who asked questions and gave commentary, including really the robust commentary that was coming in the sidebar. It was difficult for me to follow both, and I'm sure it was for some of you. So I'll just start our rounding up here by saying that, as always, we at r3.0 will be posting the recording, the slide decks, and the chat publicly on our website, and we'll be sharing that through social media. We tend to use LinkedIn most primarily, but also engage with some other social media. A couple of just quick things for those of you who can stay on about where this is heading next. So our next gathering is actually not part of the Open Dialogue series. This is another series that we started in a just in the design school context. So the design school for regenerating Earth that Joe Brewer and Penny Heipel are co-founders of, and that there's a large community of bioregionalists in the design school. We've done 2 sessions on bioregional carrying capacity, one as an introduction by me to this line of inquiry around measurement and management, and then one by me and Randy Saad, Executive Director of the Flourishing Enterprise Institute, on municipal carrying capacity. And so we're now in consultation with Joe and Penny, we're partnering to open this up into public sessions. So the next session in this series will be on sweet spots and absolute assessment with Avit Bomik, who is a member of our steering board, and Anders Bjorn, who's a longtime friend and a great scholar in the sustainability and regenerative movement. So that'll be Tuesday, February 11th from 10 to 11:30 Eastern time, and we'll be sharing more about that on our website and social media. The next sessions of the Open Dialogues are still in the sort of mid-process in terms of organizing what they will look like. So we do have already for February, we know that we'll be focusing on bioregioning and permaculture with Elias McCatcher and Gloire Mendacuza. And we also have a word out to others about that. We haven't nailed down a date yet, so keep your eyes peeled on our communication streams for that. We're also in conversation with the South Asia Bioregional Working Group, and particularly Ashish Kotari, who some of you may have seen in one of our previous conferences, and Namrata Kabra and others. And there may be other elements to that session that I won't mention now, just because we're still in conversation about that. That date is to be determined as well. But just this is a reminder that these open dialogues will be happening on a monthly cadence. So look forward to the continuation of this. The last thing that I'll mention is around our conference. So our 12th International Conference is coming up in the 9th through the 11th. The conference itself is the 9th through the 10th of September, and it is focused exclusively on bioregioning. So it's the theme this year is catalyzing bioregional resilience and regeneration, learning to re-inhabit Earth together. and we have some of our first speakers announced. You'll see in our newsletter coming out next Wednesday that Joe Brewer, Lyla June, and Samantha Power are some of the first folks who've committed to speaking in that conference. The one thing that I do really want to fill you all in on is that we are building on the prototype and piloting that happened with last year's conference of a confluence that happened simultaneously with the conference. So it was an in-person gathering that And Now What and the Equinox Collective organized in Belgium. So we at r3.0 are working with Neil and Anne about creating a guidance for bioregional confluences this coming year. So the 11th of September will be a debrief day for all of the confluences that we're inviting and providing support from our Confluence Fund that we just launched as part of the Earth Regeneration Fund in collaboration with the Design School, to invite bioregions to host their own gatherings. That one of the things that they can do together would be participate in the content from the r3.0 conference and engage in that conference, which is happening online. And then on the 11th, the day after, we will gather all of the bioregional confluences together to debrief. And then in the months after that, we will have subsequent confluence debriefs on a continental basis. So we'll be sharing more about that going forward. This is just a teaser, if you will, but if you have interest in hosting a confluence in your bioregion, in our newsletter next week, we will be sharing information on how to get in touch with us and get on board with that. So I'm going to leave it at that in terms of the details. I want to thank everyone for being with us in this open dialogue. Thank you so much for your dialogue, questions, comments, etc. And thanks in particular to Lyla June, Brandon, and Karie. If there's any last words that any of the three of you might want to say, I'll open the floor now before we close out. Lyla June, any last comments from you?
Just thank you all and love yourselves and keep praying, because we need Creator in this time, and to invite all the ancestors and the spiritual help that we have to invite it, because it's very respectful. It doesn't ever come in without an invitation. That's why so many ceremonies are about inviting that into our lives to guide us. So I would just humbly suggest we all invite Creator, or whatever you call it, whatever it is to you, to guide you and help you in your work, and that will help a lot.
Thank you. Brandon, any last words from you?
Yeah, I'd love to just give a shout out as well, and just say that the Design School for Regenerating Earth is a wonderful place where a lot of this coherence and conversations are happening. And they're just starting their next learning journey for, in time with the equinox. So I think it starts February 18th, and it's like $5 a month or something like that. But the whole idea is to how do we organize the theme of the learning journey is how to organize your bioregion. And it's literally just a wonderful group just like this, really coming together to answer these questions. So just a quick shout out to that. And then thank you to Ralph and Bill so much for holding this space, and Karie and Lyla. It's been absolutely wonderful and a pleasure. Thank you. And
thanks, Brandon. Karie?
Yeah, thank you so much to all of you for your attention and participation. Really enjoyed this discussion. And my prayer is that we all remain as open-hearted as possible during these times, to try to hold the collapse as it happens around us, and to lean on each other for support. So thanks again.
Thank you, Karie. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Lyla June, for speaking. And thanks to all of you for the great comments and questions. And until next time, I'm sure we'll be crossing paths with many of you. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.